I'm Jess from Sallie Tomato, and I've compiled an A to Z list of sewing terms that beginners should know before they get started sewing. Of course, there are more terms than I will cover, but those are more specific for quilting and apparel, so I just wanted to cover the essentials to get you started. If you're following along with our 30-day Learn to Sew challenge, I'm so excited that you're here for day 2. This series is going to build the skills, knowledge, and confidence you need to begin sewing. First in our glossary of sewing terms is applique. Applique is the process of applying one fabric on top of another fabric, and usually those fabrics are together either by stitching or fusing in place. B is for baste, bias, binding, bobbin, and backstitch. To baste means to use a longer stitch length to temporarily hold your fabrics together before the permanent stitching is applied. Basting stitches are usually encased within the final seam, but sometimes they need to be removed later on in the project if they're in an area that will be seen. Bias refers to when the grain line of a fabric is at a 45-degree angle. Bias fabric is necessary for easy binding techniques. Binding is a narrow strip of fabric that is sewn to the edges to encase the raw edges and to add structure. A bobbin is a small plastic or metal spool which holds thread and is inserted into the machine to help form a stitch. The thread from the bobbin is brought up to meet the upper thread to form the stitch. Backstitching is the 3 reverse stitches at the beginning and end of the seam to prevent the seam line from coming undone. C is for cutting mat, which is an essential board, usually made out of a plastic material, used to cut fabrics. The board usually has a measuring grid on it. C is also for the term cut on the fold, which means to align that edge of the pattern piece along the fold of a fabric. For this method, cut around the entire pattern piece except the aligned folded edge. Then, after cutting, unfold the fabric for a full symmetrical piece. D is for dart, which is a technique used to add shape and dimension to bags and apparel. E is for edge stitching, which is a straight stitch very close to the edge of a seam, trim, or the outer edge of your project. F is for feed dogs and facing. The feed dogs are the jagged metal pieces underneath the presser foot of the machine. The feed dogs lift, shift, and lower to move the fabric through the machine. Facing is a piece of fabric that is sewn along the top edge and folded towards the inside for a finished appearance. I use facings for the inner top edges of bags, so the main fabric is carried over into the interior for a professional finish. G is for grain, which is the direction of the warp and weft in a woven fabric. H is for hem and hardware. A hem is the finished edge of a project. And hardware is a loose term for the various metal findings and embellishments used on bags, such as hooks, rings, rivets, and many other functional and decorative pieces. I is for interfacing, which are the various textiles used for adding structure and stability to other fabrics. J is for Jess from Sallie Tomato. I couldn't think of any sewing terms for beginners that begin with J. K is for knit fabric, which is a stretchy fabric that is most often used for apparel, but sometimes used for bags, scarves, and other accessories. L is for lining, which is the fabric that is on the interior of a project to finish off and hide the construction seams and make it nice and smooth for adding items inside, and it is most often used on bags and apparel items. M is for mark, and to mark means to transfer the pattern symbols or placement marks onto your fabric for positioning and embellishments. N is for nap, and no, there's no napping in sewing. The nap is the direction that the surface fibers lay. For example, faux fur and velvet surfaces have a clear nap or direction that the fibers naturally lay. N is for notions, which are the tools and accessories which aid in sewing. O is for overlay, which refers to the fabric that is on top of another fabric and shows through for added dimension and texture. P is for patchwork, pattern, pleat, presser foot, piping, and pressing. Patchwork is the art of sewing small pieces of fabric together to make a larger design. A pattern is a set of sewing instructions which might include some templates used to assemble the design. The pattern templates are also referred to as pattern pieces. Not all pattern pieces are cut from a template. Some are straight cut using a rotary cutter, ruler, and cutting mat. A pleat is a fold of fabric used to create shape or add drape to your fabric. A presser foot is a small piece of metal used to keep your fabric underneath the machine and guide it through as you sew. Piping is a strip of fabric folded over cord. Adding piping or cording is a simple way to structure your project while achieving a professional look without much extra effort. Sew it into the seams on bags, apparel, and home decor. Pressing is the term for using an iron to remove the wrinkles from the fabric. It can also be used to add creases or flatten certain parts during the sewing process. Q is for quilting, which is the process of sewing together 2 layers of fabric with a layer of batting in between the fabric. R is for raw edge, right side, and rotary cutter. The raw edge is the cut, unfinished edge of the fabric. Woven fabrics like cotton and canvas need to be finished so the fabric won't fray. Non-woven fabrics such as cork fabric and faux leather can be left raw edge and won't unravel. The right side refers to the front or the printed side of the fabric. A rotary cutter is a tool used for cutting fabrics using a ruler and a cutting mat. It has a circular blade and kind of looks like a pizza cutter, but it's for sewing. S is for seam, seam allowance, and selvage. A seam is a line of stitching which joins fabrics together. The seam allowance is the distance between the raw edge and the line of stitching. Common seam allowances range from an 1/8 inch wide up to 5/8 inches wide depending on the project. The selvage is the edge of woven fabric with the manufacturer and designer information. The selvage is parallel to the lengthwise grain. T is for thread tension and top stitch. Tension is the tightness or looseness of the upper thread and the bobbin thread. The tension can easily be adjusted on your sewing machine and should be tested each time you sew with different thicknesses of material and amount of layers. Top stitching is a line of stitching that is decorative stitching to help flatten a seam or secure facing, pockets, and other features. I'm going to skip over U and V because there aren't any sewing terms for beginners using those. They're either for specific techniques or projects. So up next is the letter W. W is for width of fabric, warp, weft, and wrong side. The width of fabric is the measurement from selvage to selvage, and it's often referred to as WOF, and that might be shortened on the back of a pattern if you're wondering what that's referencing to. The warp is the lengthwise thread, which means it's parallel to the fabric, and the weft is the crosswise thread of a woven fabric. And the wrong side of the fabric references the side that doesn't have any printing and is opposite of the right side. There's no terms for X, so we're jumping to Y. And Y is for yardage. Yardage is the lengths of fabric needed for a project. Patterns will include yardage amounts for fabrics needed for that project, usually located on the back of the pattern. And at last, we end with Z, which is for zigzag and zipper foot. A zigzag stitch is a stitch made in a zigzag pattern from side to side. A zipper foot is used for inserting and top stitching zippers, trim, piping, and other embellishments onto bags, home decor, and apparel. Most zipper feet are adjustable to the position of the zipper tape that is being sewn. All of this information is a lot to take in, and I understand that a lot of learning happens by doing. So to make it a little bit easier for you, we've created a free printable with all of the sewing terms so you have your own glossary right next to you in your sewing machine that you can easily reference as you work through projects. Be sure to check out the link below to download that. I hope you're looking forward to the rest of the series because we have a lot of goodness ahead. And if you have any questions about the sewing terms that I covered, or perhaps I missed a term that you'd like to know more about, please comment below and we will be sure to answer your questions. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'll hope to see you soon.